Let's talk about the downward spirals of our world. Mm. Let's talk about archetypal forms and archetypal stories. Let's talk about physiognomy, what it teaches us about the whole, and what the whole teaches us about the individualized subject. Um, let's talk about trying times and the coming times. And if trying times and coming times are one and the same thing, let's talk about that. Let's gain a pristine understanding of where we are, where you are, why you're here, and let's put you through a test of patience. Let's put you through a test of priorities. Let's see if your priorities are straight. Let's see if my priorities are straight. Let's see if we have some sort of unseen intuitive trust in terms of you giving me your time and your energy and resource and attention and focus, and me giving you whatever I'm about to be giving you. Let's talk about channeling. Let's talk about understanding the places of things. Let's talk about space. Not space as in the wild black yonder, but space as in the absence of a thing. Let's talk about all those things. Let's talk about your dialogue with the stars. Let's talk about mysticism, spirituality, and let's not talk about the occult. Let's not even mention it. Mm. Let's talk about the enigma of life and its symbolic meanings. Let's talk about phonetics and archetypal stories. What is an archetypal story? Now, we've outlined this in past spaces, but for the sake of repetition, make it a mantra, if you will. Let's outline it again. An archetypal story is something, a procession formed by the primal truths of life, such as the birth of a human being, the conception, conceiving of a human being, the birth of a human being, its rise into adulthood, and then its fall back into irreparable, inevitable decay, and it returning back to nothing from, whence it came. That is an archetypal story. Now, why do we learn archetypal stories? We learn archetypal stories because they activate dormant spiritual knowledge within us. And by understanding that everything and anything in the living world is a repeat or a reinterpretation of these archetypal stories, only then, only then can you truly start pondering the meaning of life, the meaning of all that is, the meaning of your existence within this realm as well. Why are these things important? Because all of the formulaic practices, all of the astrologies, numerologies, uh, Jyotish, or face reading, physiognomy, finger reading, palm reading, you name it. Everything is a reinterpretation of these archetypal truths. And there are only a few archetypal processions that exist in the world. For example, in our world, from our subjective viewpoint, right? The another archetypal story that follows humanity since the dawn of humanity and the dawn of time is the story unfolding in the skies. The sun as it rises, then as it sets, and the moon, right? as it is greeted by man on the night sky, and then the moon dissipates and disappears. This is also an archetypal story. Can you link this archetypal story to that of human birth and sentience and consciousness? Well, of course you can. What else is an archetypal story? The protagonist, the hero, mm, making their way into the mouth of hell, facing great dangers and fears and temptations, and then making it out with newfound purpose and meaning, with gifts and rewards, with experiences. That is an archetypal story. And then there's the question of what is your archetypal story? Well, what are you here? Well, we all share one similar trope, and that trope is universal in the sense you come here, time passes, you have your own adventures, and then you leave. An archetypal story are the laws of physics and the laws of nature. Everything else is an impression. Everything else exists as a shadow formation of the egoic mind. Now, why do we use this terminology? Why is it important to understand that most of the things that we know to be very solid and very true nowadays are, in truth, not imprinted within the inherent design of the universe? Most of the things you know today as comfort items and so on and so forth, they're man-made. Now, do they carry a certain divinity in them? Yes, of course, but their function is limited to one's subjective interpretation of what it is. If you build a chair or if you build a table, right, you have to have a preconceived idea of what the function of that item is. And eventually, if you, let's say, take a very simple person and give them a chair, they might use it for something completely different than a chair. If you take a simple person, you give them a table, they might use it for something different than a table, right? But then there's the idea of geometry and the inherent meaning behind geometry and form. For example, a table standing on four legs, right? And it has a flat, wide surface on top, right? If you follow the logic behind its geometry, you understand very clearly that what it is meant to do, it is meant to hold things evenly on its topmost surface. Now, you might ask me, Uncle Jack, why are we talking about tables and what tables are supposed to do? What is this? What is this simplicity, right? But the secret of everything you've ever wanted to know is in that simplicity. I'm trying to teach you, I'm trying to impart onto you a very important lesson about geometry and form and inherent archetypal meaning. Geometry is symbolism. Form is symbolism. Geometry and form and the material makeup to a lesser extent create an archetypal idea of what something is and what purpose it serves. If you see a person who has a face, a bone structure that is flat and wide, and then if you see another person who has a bone structure or a face that is rounded, oval shaped, just by knowing how those shapes impress energy onto themselves, you may gain an enhanced understanding of who and what you're dealing with, meaning what kind of archetypal procession or force or energy someone is representative of. Now, we talked about the triangle and the circle and the square. We talked about these things in the past. And we'll never move away from these things because this is the bread and butter of understanding symbolism and understanding the flow of energy. Like we said, archetypal stories were formed in the mind of God, of creation itself. Creation has imagined itself the bloodstream, the lifeblood of its being is written in this code, in the code of archetypal processions. Every story, every archetypal truth, every hidden meaning, every secret tradition or culture or mythos or anything really is a sum of three parts. It is made up of three parts. 33.33%. 3. With infinity, as in 0.000000001%, or however long you want to take it, being the linear driving force that puts it all together. So anything you know or build or do not know that those things are made up of three parts, because that is the first archetypal story. And all the little things, the three parts that are made that make up the whole, are also made up of three parts. And then that is also made up of three parts. And then every small detail, no matter how small you get, even to molecular levels, you will see that at some point of inflection, everything is made up of three parts. Everything is an interplay of three types of archetypal aspects or archetypal forces. When we talk about physiognomy, we must understand this principle very well. If you want to get better at reading people, first you have to get better at deciphering the meaning of geometrical patterns. Because then you have the very daunting and difficult task of impressing that same knowledge onto a human's face, which is shifting and changing and, mm, you know, tripwired with all kinds of complexities that can lead you astray from the truth. And you want to be objective. These types of formulaic arts like objectivity, they love objectivity. So, first, understand this simple truth that will unlock for you about 90% of all hidden meanings, of all hidden things, even language, even letters, anything, even a language you can't read. That form and geometry impresses archetypal energy onto a thing. If I write a letter in a specific way, regardless of my subjective interpretation of that letter will always carry an archetypal energy or force or symbolic meaning that is its truest self, what we call, or what I call, a true name. You can be born, your parents can give you a name, but that's not your real name, right? It's a name that's given to you as a phonetic symbol of your being, right? It's a tag, it's a mark. But what is your real name? What is your true name? What are you really? Well, your true name is encoded and decoded from your genetics, from your DNA. And that true name becomes apparent through geometry and form. Luckily, geometry and form that we can study using the brilliant and beautiful art of face reading and physiognomy to an extent. So, what you are is who you are, and who you are is what your name is. And what if I told you that your name is not some abstract phonetic form, but your name is a very functional thing? Your true name admits and confesses your inherent function. And because your physiognomy reflects that function, studying what that function is may tell you very interesting things, may give you interesting insights into who you are, what you're meant to be doing, what you're good at doing, what you're probably not good at doing. Those are little hints, right? This is why every master at the um, topmost, um, how to say, part of their experiences as becoming a spiritual master will tell you, know thyself. Learn more about yourself, and everything will be made clear to you. If you don't understand something, that should already, reflect back onto you that there is a part of yourself that you do not understand, that you have yet to come into awareness about. Now, back to physiognomy and why physiognomy works and why it is incredibly accurate. Because physiognomy and face reading is removed from the interpretative layers, the burden of the interpretative layers of any other formulaic art. For example, most people that use tarot don't even know how tarot was formed. They're very ignorant of its origins. The true story of how tarot was formed was that the cards aligned or were aligned to their best ability by whoever aligned those with archetypal forces. These are archetypal energies that invade and penetrate our material world, and they find presence here through form and geometry. How do you notice which archetypal source or energy something originates from? You will notice from its geometry and form. A feminine form or a masculine form. And then masculine and feminine forms, like we said, are also made up of three parts, right? And then those three are made up of three parts. Those three are made up because God imagined himself splitting. And when God imagined himself splitting, he imagined himself splitting into three aspects: the highest, the lowest, and the hidden aspect, which you can guess where that one is. And so understanding this simple truth allows you to understand physiognomy on an intuitive level, where you don't even need any sort of formulaic knowledge, where you can become informed about a person's character or attributes or personality or tempers, or so on and so forth, immediately, uh, just by looking at them, right? You can become informed. So when we say that there are archetypal forces and there are archetypal meanings, by archetypal we mean inherent meanings in geometry and form. If you look at a dead language, you can still decipher the temperament of its letters. If you look at a symbol you don't understand, if you do a walkthrough, I don't know, inside of an Egyptian pyramid or a Nubian pyramid, read some runes off the walls, you will understand its temperament by understanding the inherent meaning of the geometry or the geometric form of the letters you were provided with. Now, I understand this concept might be confusing for most, but it is imperative that you understand it if you ever hope to gain um, uh, a true ability or a true sense to see beyond form and beyond logic and beyond material. You have to master this ide- idea. You have to be able to master looking at things in this manner, where what a thing is whispers truths about itself to you through its form, through its emanation. What is an emanation? When a thought form or a form of idea or consciousness penetrates from beyond the quantum realm and into our realm, it is given a body. It is given a form. And that form reflects imperfectly, mind you, but with a high degree of accuracy, reflects what they are like in an archetypal sense. And the map of what or who someone is on a cosmic foundational level, what attitudes and what eldritch cosmic attitudes and temperaments they're born of, what kind of energy they carry, is primarily mapped in the eyes. And more immediate things, right, like short-term things, are mapped in the body, in the physiology, and to a higher degree, the physiognomy, the face, the facial structure. So when you look at someone, you not only see who they are in terms of, what they are, what their temperament is, what their character is, what their function is, what their role is, how they view and map the world, what their capacities are, what their intellectual capacities are, what their emotional, intuitive, creative, logical capacities are. But you also see where their weaknesses are, right? And then you can see an interpretative layer of how they themselves experience their own, highs and lows. You see that level or layer. Beyond that, beyond the current life, beyond their current emanation, which is the physiology and physiognomy, through the eyes, you might also see who they are not in this life, not in this incarnative form, but who they are on an archetypal level, or what they are on an archetypal level. This is why it's difficult for you sometimes to look some people in the eye, why it's easy for you to look at other people in the eye, why some people carry immense cosmic charge and energy through the map of their eyes, and why some others don't. Why charisma and leadership and authority and true influence, right, is seen in the eyes. You know the greatness of someone's spirit through the portal of the eyes. So you can imagine it's an important part of physiognomy as a whole, face reading as a whole. What why people stopped looking at one another in the eyes, right? When you can't look at someone in the eyes is because people like to forget. Human beings love to forget. They love to experience one another through the dynamic of the ego game, which is who I have imagined myself to be against who you have imagined yourself to be, where the objective truth is right here. Everything is open and everything is clear. Nothing needs to be discussed or argued about. Everything is very clear and apparent. All you have to do is learn to read. And even if you don't know how to read, intuitively you still know how to decipher for symbolisms and symbols. You are a powerful being in the sense where you can gauge someone's degree of spiritual elevation through studying their eyes. Now there are different types of energetic charges, frequencies. There is the masculine penetrative force, and then there is the feminine force, which is the attractor or the receiving end. And then there is something in the middle, which we won't talk about yet. Those tales are for big boys and girls. But knowing that, understand a simple thing. You lock eyes with someone on the street, you have a remarkable idea of who they are and what their essence is like. You read the chart, you read the map of their eyes. Why does the natal chart look like the inside of an eye? And I'll tell you something else. Most astrologers don't even know of the existence of the inverted chart. Even those who claim to be very high level, every chart, every natal chart has an inverted version. How you come about attaining an inverted version, well, that is made apparent by what it's called the inverted natal chart. And through this inversion, you can find the other half of a person's essence and truth. That's why you have two eyes and not one. You have to see the back side and the front side as well. But back to the business of eyes, you lock eyes with someone on the street. You notice how some people have a penetrative gaze that say someone has bright blue eyes. They have a penetrative gaze, you might think. But actually, it's not true. Blue eyes are a recessive, feminine, energetic charge. So how can that be penetrative? Well, because it's not theirs that is penetrative, it is yours. What theirs is an attractor, right? You're attracted to look at it. You can't pull your eyes off of it. They suck you in. You feel like they're staring into your soul, but in truth, you are putting your soul into them. And then there are eyes who detract the gaze, deep brown eyes, a shield like formation, a fractal shield like formation within the eyes themselves. Sandy, dark brown. They detract from the eyes and pull away your gaze and onto their face. When if you look at someone with bright blue eyes, right? For example, I'm just because there's a contrast between these two. The strongest contrast is between these two colors on the face. All you can really stare into is their eyes, and their face just disappears. It becomes a blur. It is transferred into the periphery. That should already tell you a lot on a symbolic sense what those energies, you know, inhabit. Well, what is the meaning of yellow eyes or eyes with different colors or green eyes? Why are some types of eyes more uncommon and rarer than others? Well, I'll tell you a special thing too. Rare, at least in physiognomy and genes, rare does not imply special. Rare is what rare is. It's just rare. Doesn't mean it's special because it's rare. But does it have special qualities? Yes. All types of eye colors have special qualities. What those qualities are hinted by the color and the inner shape of the eye and the sclera and you name it. We won't go into too much detail there. And understanding your own can also be very important. Now, for example, brown and black are very similar in terms of how close they are to one another, right? You might think. Is that true? No, not really. Have you ever opened up a color palette on your computer? Yes, you have. Can you arrive at black from any color? Well, yes, you can. Dampen any color enough, right? And you'll get somewhat of a brownish hue, and then it'll go into blackness. What is the primary function of the color black? What does the color black imply? It implies things that are absorbent of light, things that are hidden, things that are locked away, that are not apparent. Who wears black and why? Who wears white and why? Interesting, right? Very interesting, right? Now, what about the color blue or the color green? What is this kaleidoscopic lens of different colors that we meet in other people? What are they trying to tell us about the function of their nature, of their essence, who they are? Deciphering that is a sort of a joy, right? I'm talking slowly here because I don't want to give too much away. I respect your intellect and your capacity and mental ability to decipher the meanings behind these things. But they are truly wonderful, wonderful meanings. Now, when it comes to the eyes, and especially the color brown, because the color brown is antagonized in these mostly by amateurs. I don't say this to offend them. I'm just saying what they are. Uh, There are different functions to each color. So we understand what the function of the color black is, right? Then there's the function of the color brown, which is emanation. The color brown emanates a gradual warmth. There is a penetrative type of energy that you can see through the lens of the eyes, like we talked about, right? And then there's the auric type, something that's more bloated, something that's more dense, something that's more material. This is why we call brown eyes, usually, if their form agrees, the shield. Those who have, it's always a trade off. Those who have a penetrative gaze, what we call the penetrative gaze, which is not in truth, but those who do have a penetrative gaze have an incredible innate ability to attract and form and to bridge and connect, to be attractive of others, right? Think of any person with beautiful blue eyes right now that you know in your life. They're naturally attractive. They attract your gaze. They steal it away. So why is a shield necessary? That's also an interesting question. If you know someone with tranquil green eyes, how do they feel? If you know someone with golden hues, golden, light, pale yellow, right? How do they feel? How does their gaze feel, right? Do they feel bold and brave and empowering like that of a wolf, right? Or brown, for example, feels warm and stoic and reliable and commanding, right? It forces you into the peripheral. It doesn't, it averts your gaze. It doesn't allow you to focus on one point. It commands in a different way. Like the sun, the masculine charge commands you. You cannot gaze into the sun for too long, it averts your gaze. It's golden emanation, right? Now, if our sun was dimmer, if it were dimmer, you would be able to gaze into it for longer and you would revel in its warmth. So understand that color affects the function of a thing. Not only does it affect the function of a thing, but it also communicates to you the function of a thing. The temperament behind your when you're looking into someone's eyes, you're speaking to the stars that made them. If you imagine the eye as the formation of a future sun within the cosmic intellectual mental field of all that is, we spoke about the cosmos and what it is, a mental model, right? You can see someone's destiny in their eyes and what they are to become and what they already are for both sides, inverted and non inverted. There are some energies and some energetic charge that is intense and explosive and, oh, you know? And then there are some charges that are stoic and true and constant. Then there are some that are in the middle. Then there are some that are fragile and weak, but have a rejuvenating quality to them. Then there are someone who you would think, if they were on a person, you would think that, there's boldness, there's bravery, there's a call to action. And then those things, those colors and the frequencies of those colors are also reflected in the form on the physiognomy. Like we said, geometry not only imprints inherent and archetypal and functional meaning onto things, but it also gives you a symbolic hint of what that thing means in terms of temperament. A knife or a weapon or a sword in and of itself, in its geometrical form, shares with you its temperament. And what its temperament is, it is to act and cut and to penetrate. It's a penetrative force in greater density, right? When you make a sword, you make it sharp because its geometry agrees with its function. When you make a home, you make it into a square, usually, because it agrees with its function, right? The function of a home being to keep your energy in and outside energies out. That's the function of a cube. The inherent archetypal primordial function of that form. What is then the function of a triangle or a pyramid, as we've meditated on in the past? You can very well tell just from its geometry. You don't need to read the Egyptian Book of the Dead. You don't need to ask a 120-year-old master somewhere hiding in the Egyptian, like Sahara Desert or mountains or whatever. You just have to study its functional symbolic form. Well, what is a pyramid, right? It's a triangular form with equally sharp sides, right? Very interesting to consider, right? And then what else does its form give us, right? It has a flat surface on the bottom, a squarish flat surface on the bottom with a converging sharpened edge at its top, at its topmost apex point, right? So obviously, this is a very penetrative structure that also holds a certain temperament of balance and structure on the bottom, right? It is to collect energetic charge and then to direct energetic charge in a specific direction. Why is your pen or my pencil shaped a specific way, right? When you study its geometry, you understand very well how you're meant to be using that, its function, right? The sharp end is the one you write with, right? Because it focuses the energy, it focuses the ink onto a singular point, and that allows for more accuracy, right? And efficiency than just taking a square box of ink and slapping it, right? Or smacking it down onto paper or a canvas. Just like our tools, our geometry, and our geometry found on our face specifically, right? Um, gives us great insight into the energetic and temperamental, the archetypal makeup of a human being, right? But then there's the interpretative layer where you would go and say, well, I think someone has this trait or feature, and intuitively to me, it looks like it would mean this or that. Intuitively, it would mean if that I should distrust this person or not trust this person. It's important to trust this voice as well, because you already know and have an intuitive understanding of these concepts, whether you know it or not. Intuition stands above the formulaic. The formulaic is the reverse engineering, the attempt to reverse engineer the intuitive knowing, right? But the formulaic can also aid you in a sense where if there is no intuitive activation, which is the case in most cases for most of us, right? Let's be honest. The formula can help you attain a sort of basis foundational understanding of what you're dealing with. And now, as we talked about before, um, diving into like beyond the phase, beyond the physiognomy for this life, for this incarnative form or this emanation is largely, well, firstly, you go into the abstract, but then you're dealing with things that are beyond this lifetime for a person. But it's very interesting that how the universe is designed in its godly intellectual design, that in our everyday living we get to look into the eyes of the other. We don't look into onto them in sense of like only their physiology and physiognomy, but we look into them and their essence and their soul and their past divinities or non-divinities as well. You get to look at someone beyond what they are right now. So that tells you that that is an intended design. That is an intended design, the portal of the eyes that goes so far back into someone's formation, literally from the star stuff that they are formed by, right? That there is a deep innate desire of the creator of this world, of this brilliant, miraculous realm, for us to experience one another on a level beyond animalistic, beyond primal, beyond even the current incarnative form of one another. So while it's important to understand that these three things make up a reading of someone's, like a basic reading of someone's essence, right? You cannot forget that there is an intuitive element that's already there. So these three are the geometric form of someone's face, right? And what those geometric forms or the combination and the synchronicities of those geometric forms imply in an archetypal sense. Like we said, if it's a spherical, circular form, it implies movement, enhancing of energy, flow, right? It enhances adaptability, it enhances like an increase or intensity. It is the most intense energetic charge. If you were to imagine a large round ball of metal in your mind. And then if you imagine pouring water over it, right? From the top of it, what happens to the water? It equally splits around the spheric form of around the spherical geometry, right, of the circle or the sphere. And then that water is not only allowed to it has minimal resistance and it is allowed to flow, but it is also enhanced by the geometry of the sphere on its lower end. It's allowed to flow even faster, so it increases the intensity. And then if you imagine in a similar sense a cube or a square, it has the most resistance from up top. When you pour water over it, a very large proponent of the water, a very large amount of its force will become blocked or barriered or barricaded by the topmost part of the cube, and then it will equally split on all four sides, right? So it stops the force almost completely, and it functions as a different type of barrier or energetic shield. And then if you do the same experiment in your mind with a pyramid, right? Depends on which side of the pyramid you you splash the water onto, right? If you splash it down onto from its peak point, from its apex point, it will have minimal, absolutely minimal resistance. And then it will, sort of like simmer down on the more bottom sides. But if you turn the pyramid around, right, because it has a sort of a squarish structure there on the bottom as well, you will get the same effect as that of a square. But guess what? What happens after the initial force? It stops. Then the initial force is also rejuvenated and repowered up because of the shape of the pyramid, right? The water will drip down onto its apex quite aggressively with the force of gravity, with gravitational pull. So, yes, the first rule is simple. The geometry of a thing talks about its archetypal meaning and function, as in its divine godly design. And then the second thing is its material makeup. So this is what the alchemists went crazy about, because they had very little intuitive sense, most of them, I would say, for what the implications of the periodic table was, for example. Um, the second portion of a reading is the material makeup of a thing. What is something made of? Right? Its density, its wavelength, its resonance. And the third one, right? What is the color of that thing and what is the color indicative of, right? Like for example, you are made of flesh and bone, right? On a foundational level. Your face is made up of skin, and then there are different things that form on the skin with different colors, and depending on what the color of that thing is, it implies a different thing, right? Sometimes these colors are inverted, sometimes they're not. What color is the inside of your body? Of course, the inside of your body is not lit up, but if you did light it up, what color would most of the inside of your body be? Red, right? What is the outside color of your body, right? That speaks on things as well. Your eyes, your brows, everything, really, right? What colors are associated with coldness? Like when your skin freezes up, what colors are more present there? What colors are associated with warmth, right? And rejuvenation? What colors are associated with this and that? And basically, when you gain an understanding of these archetypal meanings behind the things that exist in our everyday lives, where all of these things that are created, anything human, that's why I say that anything man-made, even formulaic arts, are a human reinterpretation of the Bible of nature that we were given. The Bible of nature is anything that you could possibly imagine is possible, because you cannot imagine something that's not of this world, that's beyond this world, because the only thing you've been given to learn from are the phantom shadow images of this material world. Now, what is that? Let's say, I always say, um, the highest level thing, the highest level key, the highest level truth to um, worldly design, right? And if you want to go past it and beyond it, right, is you must, how to say, you must meditate on the form that cannot possibly exist, right? And to us humans, what that form looks like, it is a fractal spiral, it is a toroidal vortex, either an inward vortex or an outside vortex, because you cannot possibly imagine or experience anything that is beyond the boundaries of the wealth of sensations that you were given as a human being. This is why those who have experiences beyond logic, beyond the boundaries of what exists in this world, right? They always say, well, it's something that I can't really describe, right? Because it cannot be described in a logical, sensual way, right? Now, it can be deciphered and it can be talked about, but it cannot be understood to the degree where, let's say, I tell you this thing that occurred to me, and I can perfectly divine that experience or information and then plant it in your head so that you can experience it as well. And that's also a part of the design of this world. So yeah, a very large proponent of physiognomy is basically Starspeak. And Starspeak is firstly understanding the makeup and the functional meaning of the makeup of something. Start with something basic like a chair or a table. Study its inherent function, right? So its inherent function, again, by what we mean with by its geometry, hints at its function, right? If you wanted to stab someone, you would take a sharp stick, right? You wouldn't take a wide, um, sort of like a chunky piece of wood, right? You would take a you would sharpen the stick if you wanted to stab someone with it, right? Now, what does that tell you about someone who has an overly protruding, sharp, narrow jaw, right? Well, first you ask yourself, well, what is the inherent symbolic meaning of the jaw, and how do you study this? You study this by understanding what the function of the jaw is on the human body, right? And what is the function of the jaw of the human body, right? It has to do with speech, it has to do with teeth, it has to do with um, the bottom fundamental grounded earthy part of the human face of that physiognomy, right? And then you attach a certain symbolic interpretation to it. Now this is where the human element comes in. You could be wrong or limited in your lesser subjective understanding of the inherent symbolic meaning of what that facial feature implies, and you always need to be humble about this and you know, assume that you don't know everything. Far from. But if you can do that, if you can, pass that hurdle, then you can ask yourself, well, if the jaw inherently has these meanings, right? Then what would it tell me? What would it tell me if someone had the addition of a sharp triangular influence, that type of feature on their jaw? What does that mean? Well, we already know it's a penetrative force, right? And it has to do with speech and teeth. So it's probably someone who's very mm, meticulous and scrupulous in the way they naturally communicate, right? Is it someone who's an emotional communicator with an emotional basis and foundation for how they relate to other people or not? Probably not. Is it someone who can be sly and convincing? Probably yes. Is it someone who is action first and thought after? Most likely yes. Now, could this be a good thing? Yes, of course. It could make a good, how to say, action man out of you. It could make a good leader out of you. It could make you. So it's like tools, and it's really about the rest of the context where you can, let's say, conjure up an image of the person and decipher whether they're more likely to use this skill in a good sense or a bad sense, right? But when you know someone's face in that regard, in this very basic, just geometrical form, you can already gauge what kind of communicator they are. Like how often are they willing to lie? How much they're not willing to lie, right? How much they care about justice, how much they care about emotional empathy or not, so on and so forth, right? Now, if someone has, how to say, a recessed, spherical, or oval, still narrowing, right, jawline, right, or a chin, you can guess that that is a person who's rather conflict averse, right? You can say, well, they would rather flow and adapt with the situation a little bit more. They're probably highly receptive, highly intuitive, right, with a strong energetic charge, right? But they're also not someone who's going to strong arm their way through a crowd of people to get what they want, right? So these are people who will architect this is the creative one. This is someone who will architect a creative solution as to get what they want. Usually, these people are the most dangerous from my experience, right? Like if you make someone angry, who will directly come and attack you, obviously that is dangerous and very lethal type of personality and temperament to have. But someone who is very, very scrupulous and very inwards thinking and very analytical and very intuitively charged with an incredible, intense array of creative, ways of communicating and expressing themselves, right? Those are all that can also be a dangerous person because they're going to do it in a creative way, right? They're going to wait for it. They're going to be to plan for it. so to speak. So, yeah, what can we say about that person, right? With spherical oval influence on the bottom side, right? You can say that this is someone who's a deep thinker, someone who's intuitively charged. You can say that this is someone who communicates on a very emotional, delicate level. They probably say less words than your average person. They're far more reserved than the average person. They're less likely to really tell you what they think, right? And they're less likely to share with you their deepest concerns and knowledge and wisdom and yada yada. But also there's someone whose word, and this also is reflected then in the voice and how the throat is constructed, right? They can be convincing in a different type of way, not in a sly and convince like a car salesman is convincing, right? But how a philosopher is convincing, right? So these are different modalities of the same thing. And now imagine the type of knowledge you can arm yourself with just by knowing this principle of archetypal geometry and archetypal processions, and then taking this knowledge and applying it to all of these different parts of the human physiognomy and physiology, and then on gaining a general contextualized understanding of the whole, minus even the eye stuff that we talked about, right? So this is why I call it, like, sometimes it's like basically like Starspeak, because you're speaking to these archetypal energies that form the makeup of this human being, which is a miracle of nature. Every human being is a miracle of nature, regardless of their current, temptations, or the trials and tribulations they're putting themselves through, right? um, they are still this incredible makeup of these cosmic things, right? This mental model that we know as the universe, this reflective mirror world that we know as the universe. um, that is the basic fundament of physiognomy, right? And I know this, like, you gives more questions than it answers, right? But the basic objective fundament is that. And it's also based on the same archetypal truths and aspects and principles, for example, as we said, like the tarot was based on, right? But the problem in the tarot, for example, there's hundreds of reinterpretations, and you can reinterpret it several times over. So it's, of course, the formulaic art that has had the least amount of reinterpretative, cycles, will most likely be the more accurate ones in an archetypal sense. Where I have a problem with formulaic art, and especially those who take formulaic art and then present it, their own interpretation of it, as objective truth, that's basically how you make a cult, right? It's basically how you form a cult, where you say, well, my limited and lesser egoic understanding of this incredibly complex and miraculous thing is the correct one, and you all better believe it or else, right? It's sort of like framing the belief of its collective followers as the primary force for validation, right? And the moment that validation disappears, the truthfulness of it dissipates as well, because you have people who are not agreeing with it. That what terrifies the 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 cultist or the occultist, right? Or those who would use um, archetypal knowledge or archetypal wisdom, or these miraculous things that are given to us, right? Even the formulaic cards are miraculous things. They're not by default negative things. It's just people tend to interpret them as such, and they tend to use it as such, as like control mechanisms or mechanisms for political power and so on and so forth. So what terrifies these people the most, because they themselves don't even believe some of the things that say are this way or that way, is if people start disagreeing with them. They can't bear with the idea, because they're that's their primary, how to say, fortress that they've built around their belief system. And if someone disagrees with you, it lessens the truthfulness of what you're trying to preach, because deep down you also understand that what you're trying to preach has no archetypal truth to it, right? There's no quality of truth that's measurable, right, to what you say. It's like maybe in like The best case scenarios, it's like a half truth, where someone takes something that's a half truth, or they have sort of like a partial understanding of its meaning, and then they just make up the other part completely. So basically it's a mess. And why sort of like I also added the tag of suicide era to this spaces is because I want to touch on that a little bit too. The only way humanity is destroyed as a collective entity is if humanity destroys itself, truly, right? And a very particular thing, right? A, a very particular thing that haunts the human collective right now, as of today, is its inability to admit that there are many things we don't know. There are many things that you are just not equipped to know yet. On the internet, even in real life, wherever you go, everyone is convinced that they know everything. Everyone is convinced that my opinions are matter and my opinions are the most important and my opinions are this and this and that. I'll tell you what, it's a great joy when life gives you proof of your opinions and your convictions as being true. And you should be empowered by that. But you should be very cautious. You should have a cautious confidence about you, in my opinion. This is just one humble man's opinion. You need to have good proof, objective markers of, well, this is my experience, and this is what I can share with other people. If you don't have that objective proof, and if you're just basically faking it, which is what most people nowadays do, not only in the esoteric fields, but in any field, right? What you're basically committing is spiritual suicide. And I'm very careful with my words when I usually say these things. But what is spiritual suicide, right? It's your voluntary choice to be inauthentic to your nature and your spiritual self. And when you're inauthentic to your nature, it automatically means you know, right, that you don't know. Yet instead of saying, well, I don't know this thing or how that thing works, right? You'll go out and sell your thing as like, I know everything. I'm all knowing. I figured it all out. Then why are you still here, my friend? Why are you still here in this realm of learning, in this cosmic school, if you know everything? If you've deciphered, you know what's weird to me about especially the movement where they say, well, I've unlocked the meaning of life. I've completely lost my ego. I've transcended the matrix. Then why are you still here, still in the matrix, dummy? Why are you still here if you transcended the matrix? Why are you still here? The very fact that you're here is proof that you have not, in fact, transcended anything, right? So it's a trying time that humanity is being led into right now, because incompetence is at its highest and confidence is also at its highest, which is a delusional confidence, where we teach our children, well, whatever you say is the most important thing, whatever you're feeling is the most important thing on this world. Oh, it's all about you, how you feel, what you think. Tell everyone what you think. Go on Twitter and tell everyone your opinions. Tell everyone how they should act, they should behave. It's projection upon projection upon projection, right? We must understand a very simple truth in any sort of formulaic art you do. It is very apparent, and trust me, from that vantage point, we all look very stupid. To higher consciousness, it's very apparent who and what each of us are. Because, as I told you today, it's literally displayed on your body and in your eyes, right? It's literally all there. There's nothing you can hide. And the only way to deal with that truth is to have acceptance and to have a degree of humbleness. I'm not saying you should become a saint, to have a degree of humbleness, right? To wear your misgivings and your shortcomings with a certain level of, you know, this is it. Yes, it's me. It's how I am. It's all written on all of our faces. All of my misgivings are written on my face, right? No matter how much I want to deny them or reject them, or I play these ego games or mental gymnastics to avoid them, and so on and so forth. I always want to speak on this, right? Because I sometimes see comments for like a lot of people repost this. I don't know why they resonate with it. They'll say like, "Oh, like people who do physiognomy, but they won't show their own face." I'm like, you assume then that the primary function of physiognomy is to judge others, right? That's where your mind is. It's in the state of competition where you think that if someone does a physiognomy or a face reading or whatever, they're doing so to judge others as lesser or superior, right? That's where your mind is, right? Um, that is not the function of this art or any art, right? Imagine if someone saw my natal chart and they were like, "Yeah, Uncle Jack, I'm sorry, but your natal chart is inferior to mine." You'd call them a terrible, astrologer or whatever, right? You tell like, what are you talking about? I mean inferior, superior, blah blah blah. It doesn't work that way, right? Um, it's important to know um the limitations of your own mind, and it's important to also understand the degree to which everyone knows your bullshit. Even the people you've lied to successfully, even they innately, like their souls, know your bullshit as you know my bullshit and I know your bullshit unapologetically. And in the next realm where we're going, right? Inevitably, that is the destiny of even the most terrible, despicable, unworthy soul that is made from that divine spark of creation. Their uttermost destiny is to arrive in that next realm. Some will take the long route, some will take the longest route, but eventually they will get there. And when they do get there, that realm is a realm of nakedness, right? Where we are directly not hidden by time, not hidden by delay, not hidden by our imperfect perfect physical bodies, right? The imperfect, how to say, energetic emanation that is your fleshly body, but your energy that is immediately felt. And everyone is naked, everyone is vulnerable, everything is known. There is nothing that is hidden. Why do we exist in a world of shadows and an inversion of the higher realm? Because in this world, truth can be hidden, it can be manipulated, it can be corrupted, it can be swayed, it can be moved, it can be delayed, right? That is the form that is that fact alone is what allows us to exist in this individualized ego identity state as you as an individual thing outside of your highest truth. Why? Because we've been bad boys and girls, and we've probably, broke the mirror a couple of times, and we're very ashamed of our highest truths, right? That's why we're there, why we're here. You're not in a prison, so to speak, but you kind of are in a jail cell of your own making, I would say, right? Well, this is good for you because you have to come to terms with who and what you are. And if you find out that you're not as good of a person as you were told you were, right, or as you thought you was, or not as smart or not as sophisticated, the best thing you can do to get closer to the one that made you, right, as perfect, right, in its perfect image, is to have acceptance and humbleness of your shortcomings, right? So yes, judgment, physiognomy, a little bit, stood apart, those two things. It's important to know as we study, you know, the formulaic art, and as we study physiognomy, for example, specifically, um, You will gain an ability at some point when you reach a threshold of understanding. You will gain an ability to just look at someone and be like, oh, okay, this is how they speak, this is how they talk, this is who they are, this is who they've imagined themselves to be, what their childhood was like, what their adult years are like, where they currently are on an emotional level, uh, to an extent how their health is. Physiognomy with health is a little bit wonky. It doesn't always translate because if something usually shows up on the face, it's already like quite far gone, right? So physiognomy is not the best for medical readings. Um, Contrary to like what the Chinese way of doing it would say, they would say it's like 100% accurate, but it's not true in from my experience. But yeah, you gain a very good understanding of what they are, right? Who they are, what they represent, so on and so forth. It's not for judgment. It's like that. And just know like they're naked and you're naked. Everyone's naked. The less we bullshit ourselves about ourselves, the better we're going to be. The less you bullshit others about, yourself, the better off you'll be. The challenge here is to, you know, mind your own bullshit and don't overdo it. We all do bullshit to a certain degree or whatever. We need it to sustain our egos or whatever. But after that, after a certain degree, you really have to like, um, cut it out of your habits, so to speak. So yeah, study geometric forms, their inherent meanings, resonance, frequency, wavelength, meaning of color, right? The synchronicity of different geometrical forms and patterns if you want to get better at physiognomy, right? And understand the general makeup of things. Understand, think about what's archetypally true in this world. There are not many things in this world that are archetypally true. Nature is the first Bible, right? Whatever you find in nature is archetypally true, right? It's inherent to creation, so to speak. Whatever you find in the cosmic mental vortex of all that is also archetypally inherently true, right? What is not archetypally inherently true? Well, if I say the letter A and then if I give it a form, well, this is the letter A, everyone. Let's agree that this is the letter A, right? That is not archetypally true. That is man-made. That's a human reinterpretation of an abstract concept, right? Mm. Now, the closest thing you would get, for example, to like a letter A is like when you pronounce letter A, what kind of geometrical shape your mouth makes, right? So, for example, a very good example of an archetypally true symbol that sort of represents its phonetics and energetic charge accurately is the letter O, right? Because when you say the letter O, you literally make the shape with your mouth, right? So that one is, for example, a good example of something that's interpreted in a strong way, and then something that's not uh, interpreted in a strong way is like, let's say, the letter A, right? Completely different, completely different. So um, think of it in those terms. The more you understand archetypal makeup of the universe, the more you will understand divinity, the more you will understand God, the more you will understand beauty as an underlying feature design for everything that is, and the more you'll be able to see through people and see through things, the meaning of things, the function of things, the geometry of things, physiognomy, their faces, yada yada. You'll just be able to look at something and know what temperaments and represents. And I'll tell you another thing, you'll get good at understanding the archetypal energies or the deities or the gods that underline and are ever present in our reality through the impressions you are given by these different geometric forms. Like you'll be able to decipher, well, if there must be some sort of symbolic deity that represents this archetypal energy or this archetypal part of creation, such as birth, right? And you can deep dive into that. Then you can deep dive into growth, into decay. You can deep dive into death. You can deep dive into transmutation, transformation. All of these are different entities that are subparts and subcategories of other things, right? And all of these things have a true name, right? You can make 25 different gods with 25 different names and make people believe in them, but everything has its true archetypal function and true archetypal name. That's the best way I can explain it to you without making myself go insane, because I have to basically, take these very convoluted, complex topics and just, put them in a paragraph somehow and sort of like deliver them to you. But yes, the base. I did this space because I'm asked this question like very, very, very often. What is the basis, the objective basis of physiognomy and physiognomic truth? That is the objective basis of physiognomy. Geometry hints at an archetypal function, right? And temperament. That archetypal function and temperament hits at something else, right? The makeup of a thing hints at something. The color of a thing hints at something. That is the objective basis of physiognomy, and at least what I um, um, sort of inspired most of my work from, right? Because you don't just want to do reverse engineering, which is, well, we interviewed 1,000 prisoner murderers or whatever, and 572 of them had this trait. That is bad science, right? That's a very amateurish way of approaching an intuitive and philosophical art form, right? Which, let's say, face reading your physiognomy is. You can't just take. What about the other 43%? So you're saying you're happy with 57% accuracy. I'm very unhappy with 57% accuracy. There must be a deeper, more detailed, more in-depth truth to these things, right? And how you attain this truth is not by learning the numbers and understand, like deciphering the numbers, but by understanding what those numbers serve, like what those numbers are statistically sourced from, what is the ultimate divine archetypal primordial source of meaning for these specific um, attributes and attitudes and so on and so forth, right? So yes, you're a mirror of your consciousness. You're a cosmic mirror of what you are destined to become and what you are spawned by. So everyone, every single person on this planet is born of um, cosmic truths, inherent cosmic truths, and some are sourced from Earth or Earth-like entities. Some are sourced from different types of stars. Some are sourced from here and there. Um, but understand that your larger destiny is to become an ultimate highest form representation of the temperaments and the energies you were born from, like you were born with, right? That's your imprint, and that's your your destiny or density, right, so to speak. So yeah, think on that, folks. Buy a reading if you want to support me, or buy my stuff, or just donate. Everything is on a link um on my profile status. Appreciate you all, um, and much love to you. Enjoy these wonderful days.